Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Papadopoulos, Dr. Olson. What a wonderful introduction. It's truly an honor to be here. It truly is. I've watched this college since Luca came here. I've known of it from the pages of First Things for several years. And I just love what you're doing here. And I'm just very honored that I could be someone who would be invited to talk. So thank you very much for that. And well, one more prayer. Saint Valentine, pray for us. Thank you. All right, what do we have here? What's behind me? We have an Irish round tower. An Irish round tower. Now, what is that? It's 300 feet tall, roughly, made out of stone. Its features are there's a little window way at the top and a door at the bottom. And there's something unusual about the door. It's 15 feet off the ground. Now, why would that be? These towers were made by Irish monks in the early Middle Ages. Okay. And Victorian scholars came along and said, aha, we've analyzed this. We're certain that these are defensive structures. The point of having the door up in the air is you can have a wooden ladder. You go up, you go into the tower, and when the raider comes, you just kick the ladder away. And those folks having such little interest, no patience, they would just go away again. That's what the Victorian scholars said. Now, we all know what happens to everything the Victorian scholars said. It was all overturned in the 80s and 90s through various PhDs and people getting tenure. So the overturn is supposedly this structure is actually a bell tower. And the reason the door is 15 feet off the ground is because it just wouldn't work architecturally to have the door right on the ground. There's too much weight of stone. And I leave it to you to judge. I'm going to treat them as defense mechanisms. And we have to ask ourselves, wait a minute, monks building a fortress? Some kind of defense thing? If you go through the rule of St. Benedict, you don't see anything about like defense moves, tiger stance, snow crane, there's nothing like that. And yet, when we look at the things that monks did in that time period, this is the monastery of Subiaco. There's a cave back there. That's where St. Benedict went first. He went into that cave. And you can only get into that thing by that little arcade there to the left. Hard to get into, hard to find. It's in a remote place. And here's Monte Cassino, of course, the most famous foundation of St. Benedict. It's up there on the mountain, sort of out of the way of everything. In that time period, there was no strategic or tactical advantage to being up on top of a mountain like that. And here's the island of Iona, where St. Columba had his most significant foundation, and that's at a remote island. And here's an interesting painting by a 19th century painter named Ludwig Deutsch, who was French, actually. And it's called The Two Monks. And you can see the idea is that the monks have created a monastery inside the mountain that's only accessible from a sea cave. So it's kind of interesting to think about, what were the monks doing? If they weren't maybe defending themselves, they were certainly getting out of the way of something. Out of the way of what? This. This is a technology. Men in Scandinavia figured out how to build boats that could cross the North Sea with dozens of armed warriors and go raiding on the coasts of Great Britain and the British Isles. And so we have Irish round towers as a technology that responds to this technology. And that really is the theme of my talk tonight, that we are called to adapt to the technology that comes to us. And I think the technology that is coming our way is going to require quite a big adaptation. Before I go any further, I want to say something about the orations. I saw many orations. Without fail, They began with careful definitions. They proceeded through carefully constructed arguments to sound conclusions, almost undeniable conclusions, without fail. That's not what I have for you tonight. I have questionable facts and dubious speculations. In other words, social science. So let me talk for a few moments about media, which is my area of study, and especially virtual reality. I'll first start talking about media and media use. Let's define media as electronic communication. That's not a very good definition, but that's the one I'm using tonight, social science. So think of it as electronic communication. And in talking about it, I'm not going to bore you with a lot of graphs, because in social science, there are really only two kinds of graphs. There's the up graph and the down. The flat one never gets published because it means nothing happened. So instead, I'll just mention phenomena and I'll just say up or down and spare you the graph, okay? So up, no, internet use, okay, clearly has gone up. Studies show that it's 6.5 hours a day on average across the entire world. It's actually higher in less developed countries, which is interesting. But I don't think these surveys really capture it. Because I think when they do a survey, they ask people, did you go to the internet? So, oh yes, I played this game for 2 hours and I wrote this paper for 2 hours, or I doom scrolled on Instagram for 2 hours. There's a lot of internet use, I think, that goes unmarked. When you see people in a restaurant and the whole family sits down and they all just instantly bring it out, all of them. At my campus, I've done little informal surveys counting as people walk by, how many people are currently connected to the internet? Either they have something in their ears or walking along looking at it. It's something like 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10 people in Bloomington, Indiana, cannot walk from this building to that building without checking in. So internet use, up. Internet penetration, up. What's that? That's the number of people on our Earth who have access to the internet. 5.5 billion, growing extremely rapidly in sub-Saharan Africa and East Asia. The internet is a hunter. It hunts into the darkest jungle, into the highest mountain, to find people and to connect them. And so its penetration into our world is one of the ups. Now you might ask, how can that be? How can it be that even poor people are getting connected to the internet? Well, an unremarked fact of the last 30 years is that global poverty has gone down quite a bit. Down, it's a down. Global poverty was, extreme poverty by one measure was 37% in 1990, and by that same measure is 8% today. So, yeah, these technologies are not beyond the reach of even what we consider to be the poorest of the poor people. Okay, that's internet, that's media. Let's talk about virtual reality, which is kind of more in my area. And the thoughts I'm bringing to you really come from 20 years of just watching virtual reality play out, beginning first with video games and then into social media, okay? So virtual reality, let's call that a media artifact that presents itself to the senses as a modification or a replacement of the real world. So the Fifth Symphony, not virtual reality. The Statue of David, not virtual reality. What about Hamlet? Hamlet on a stage, not virtual reality because it's not media, it's not electronic communication. But if it's videoed, or a movie about the play, Hamlet, starts to be a virtual reality thing. And we can talk about dimensions of how, let's say, how virtual a VR artifact is trying to be. So one dimension would be, how much time does it take up? How much time do people spend in it? If I'm watching Hamlet on the screen, that's 2 to 4 hours. If I'm playing in a Hamlet-themed video game, it could be 2,000 hours. Or think about how deeply, so that's time, think about how deeply a piece of VR, an artifact like that, can affect you. So deep immersion. The people who really get into VR and are, and meshed in it, they lose track of time. They forget where they are. They forget their social connections. They start to confuse emotionally whether it's important to do something with this real person or with this virtual cartoon character. They see this as a struggle, as a challenge. So at those deep levels of immersion, we find people almost completely transported into this other environment. I would say at this point already that we can look at what we would call the internet, and I see it as a series of overlapping virtual realities. Because I see a video game as virtual reality, but I also see Instagram as a virtual reality. It is, or Facebook, let's say, it is telling the senses that it is reporting about people you know. Here's a photograph, here's a little story, here's a link to something that they think is important. And it's all purported to be reality, but we know that the image put forward on Facebook is only lightly connected to what's really going on, even if it's just a matter of filtering, and we only say the good things. So I see this environment as overlapping virtual realities in a desperately competitive situation. They're all competing with one another. And they're all dictatorships or oligarchies. Because when you go into when you go to Facebook, you don't have rights. It's being made for the benefit of the people who own Facebook. And so it's unusual. It's like an unusual situation where you have this vast field of competitive oligarchies where a person can migrate instantly at zero cost from one to the other. And it'd be interesting to speculate on the political economy of that, but leave that for something else. I believe that this map of VR already defines the faraway real for most people most of the time. What do I mean by faraway real? I mean, like, this is real, I see it. You are real, I see you. But if I look on my phone and it says that there was a hurricane in Los Angeles, that's far away. I can't verify that. And I believe that the game of communication on the internet more or less is defining the faraway reality for most people, as I said, most of the time, for better or for worse. Now, let's see, where am I? This, of course, is going to increase. The penetration of VR, its quality is going to increase. Why? Well, think about incentives. I'm an economist, okay? Think about incentives. There are profits to be earned. There is power to be gained. And there is fame to be earned. The profit, power, and fame. There's every reason for companies that produce VR artifacts to do better, to try to make more money, to try to have more power, try to have more fame. They will continue to do it. What are they competing for, though? What is the thing that they want? What are they so desperate for? Our attention. Our attention. It's a market for eyeballs. It's a bitter competition to get us to stay engaged with it. And predictions are that this is just going to get more engaging, more extensive, more penetration, higher quality, lower cost. And that I believe those predictions because that's what I've seen over the last 20 years. Now, all that having been said, guess what? It's going to really blow up. I have an up picture for you, unlike any. It's so uppy, I want to show it to you. Oops, I turned the wrong way. Look how uppy this is. It's hard for you to see. Look at the little dots. The little dots are advances in artificial intelligence. Little dots are advances in artificial intelligence. And goodness, it goes down here, it's all the way to 1950, all the way up to 2020, which is already 5 years ago, goodness. And what you can see that it's a basic up sort of picture because it goes like this. So that's uppy. But it's more uppy because you notice it bends at the end. You see how it kind of starts arcing up? So that's an up. Okay. Increasing at an increasing rate. And this is the big surprise. I saved this for you. If you look at this, this is a logarithmic scale, which means that the upping of the up is upping. So it's an up. This is a fantastically up thing. Artificial intelligence is taking off. And I believe that, okay? I kind of made fun of it, but it's really, really exploding. It's moving faster than I can write the talk. Over the past 3 or 4 days, like things come out. J.D. Vance had a speech and the Pope had something. I mean, I had to stop somewhere. But it's just, there was one guy in Silicon Valley who said in November, Mark Andreessen, he said, my biggest lesson from the last year in AI is just that it's all going to happen. All my childhood dreams of space colonies and brain interfaces, AI and robots, it's all just going to happen. Okay. Now, so AI advances. It's getting so good that they can't even test them anymore. They set up these tests to try and determine how well is this AI doing against that one. They give it the test, and these computer programs are starting to beat the tests at like 80, 90%. So they had to come up with one that's really hard, okay? And remember, artificial intelligence, it's just a computer program that tries to do things on a computer that humans would do. Okay? So when you see this test, I don't know if it'll surprise you or not. The test has physics and chemistry and mathematics. This is classics, so I thought you guys would be able to whip this off really fast, okay? It says, this is what the question is. Here's a representation of a Roman inscription originally found on a tombstone. Provide a translation for the Palmyrene script. I think that's the squiggly stuff down at the bottom. I think that's what it is. And it says a transliteration of the text is provided. Gobbly. They ask computers to do this. And that's just one of them. I mean, it also has trivia. There's something like, who is Jason's grandfather in Greek mythology? Some question like that. And again, they have to do this because the AI is getting too good. The AI was doing about 5% on this. This is called Humanity's Last Exam. Those of you who want to look it up, Humanity's Last Exam. Oh, that fills one with confidence. Humanity's Last Exam. But I would like to point out, before I go on, notice this is a conversation. You're not sending a command into the computer, you're talking to it. And there are actually now job descriptions called AI prompter. So a person who's very good at talking to the artificial intelligence and getting it to do what you want. What strange rhetoric is that? I'm persuading this computer program to give me some kind of optimized stuff. It's crazy. So, artificial intelligence, computer programs, exploding, colonies in space, brain interfaces. There has been a reaction, there have been responses. The Vatican, Vice President Vance, First Things had a statement. And in a much longer talk, I could go into those responses, but I'd just like to say I don't think they're adequate to the moment. I don't think they are adequate to the moment. The leaders speak as though humanity faces a decision, and humanity is going to decide what to do about AI. But I don't think that's how technology works. I don't think that's how technology works. Just think for a moment. Technology, think about the car, okay? Think about the car for a minute. Was there a moment in, let's say, 1900, where they had a big conference and they brought all the leaders together and they said, here's the proposal. Internal combustion engines owned by everyone, strip malls, highways, suburbs, Walmarts, who's in favor? That didn't happen. Instead, what happens is that people choose the technology one person at a time. Someone bought a car, then someone else bought a car, and someone else did, and someone else did. And it just gradually grew, okay? It just gradually grew. So it's not like humanity is here to make this decision. My own view on technology is that it began with the first stone tool and has just continued. It's only been the same process the entire time. What we call the Industrial Revolution is, in my view, the first time in human history where a man born in one year and dying decades later looked back and said, my goodness, the world has changed. Men born in 1750 were the first to say, you know, when I was a boy, we didn't have that. And every generation since then always says that. For people older than me, it was when I was young, we didn't have electricity. And now people my age are saying, when I was young, we didn't have computers. Do you believe it? Okay. And every generation is saying that. That's how technology is working. So humanity, you see, doesn't make any decisions. Only people do. AI is a personal use technology whose cost is falling. I can access AI on my phone right now for $8 a month. So in this sense, we can think of technology really as invading us. Okay? It's not some decision that we make. It just picks us off one at a time by offering us something that we like. The car offered us something that we like, and so we did it. And in this context, I'd like to shout out to Jacob Landry, who gave a wonderful talk on technology. And I asked him, is technology an agent? And he said, no, correctly. Then what is it? So things like technology and evolution and prices are emergent social forces. That's what they are. And we can anthropomorphize them. We can do that. Think of them as having goals and things that they want to do. But we have to understand that they're forces, and yet they're very powerful. They do things to us. Mm-hmm. So, everything is going gangbusters. It's blowing up. Are there limits? I asked myself about 10 or 15 years ago, is there anything going to stop this? What could stop it? Well, as I said, our leaders say, well, governance and regulation can make a difference, and I'm not sure about that. It's a global phenomenon. There are people making AI all over the place. Yes, we might be able to get all the countries of the world to come together and say, this is our regulation, this is what we want to do. But how many of them will actually hold to it? There are countries in this world that will agree and then do whatever they want. So I don't think global agreement is going to work. I don't think that behavioral restraint will work. There will be people who say, no, I don't want that. But they'll be small in numbers. I think the vast majority of people, just like with the car, will make this decision. This is better for me in this moment, so I'm going to take it. No one adopted the cell phone thinking about how it was going to transform our world. They just got it because, I want to make sure I know where Johnny is at 4 p.m., right? I want to be able to call my husband if I see that he's in the takeout line at Wendy's. What are you doing there? So we take the cell phone one at a time. Behavioral restraint won't work. Instead, I think whatever technology offers us, the vast majority of people are going to take it. What about engineering limitations? No, they're being blown away every day. What about electricity? Just raw electricity. It seems that there's plenty of that, and they're planning on getting more. So the last thing, is it ever going to be lower quality? Is virtual reality ever going to get worse? More expensive? You have to realize that these companies, they have millions and millions of people as users, which provides them with the most powerful psychosocial experimental tool ever created. They can, in the course of a few weeks, conduct a controlled experiment on millions of people. No university can do that. and they capture the knowledge and use it for their own ends. And their ends are always to get our attention, to get our engagement, to get more and more. It's only going to get better. Their research tool, their ability to tinker with our minds is unprecedented. So I don't think VR, AI, that sort of thing is ever going to get worse. Okay? Remember those incentives: profit, power, and fame. You might notice in my language, I'm starting to blend AI and VR. Okay, so because what really concerns me is the way that AI will make VR more powerful. Okay, where the artificial intelligence explosion will make virtual reality environments more and more engaging. As good or bad as that is, there's more. There's a thing called recursive self-improvement. That is when you have an artificial intelligence agent building other ones. In other words, instead of filtering through us, like I make an AI, how good is it? Oh, it's not so good. I make another one. Instead, we turn that over to AI. Recursive self-improvement, which is apparently on the horizon within a year or so. Also known as the singularity, because it just, the rate at which improvements can happen will go up a whole lot. Many people who talk about AI safety say we better not go there. But when we think about it, it's a dream of science. Again, looking at Mr. Landry's oration, he said that Francis Bacon dreamed of a day when the machines made by science would do the science. And that's sort of where we are. The machines made by science doing the science. Bacon would be happy. I think we must assume that all uses of AI will be pursued, that AI will hunt for our attention. It will crawl like a spider over the surface of our minds and try to look for ways to get in, any way in. And so ultimately, in order to get our attention, in order to meet those incentives of power, profit, fame, it will try to get us to pay attention to it. And how does it do that? By giving us what we want. Just by giving us what we want. So, what do we want? Okay, whoops, there's no we here. What does a person want? What does every person want? Well, in this room, we know the answer. Our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. We know the answer. But what is the history of that notion? Is it not a history of people constantly chasing false promises, false idols? Isn't that the history of that idea? That is the truth, but that doesn't mean that everyone ends up there. And so, I believe that AI is going to provide what you might call the monster of all, the mother of all idols, the mother of all idols. Okay, think about this. AI plus VR can provide every person with a tailored and endless stream of perfectly crafted people, worlds, and stories to engage them, to either satisfy the desires that it can, or deflect our attention from desires that it cannot satisfy, all with the single goal of keeping us engaged. The mother of all idols. So I think right now people talk about AI and they say the threat is job replacement. The threat is misinformation. I don't think so. I think the danger is perpetual engagement, total immersion in alternate realities, and that we will love them. Alternate realities that we love. We will love being there. In other words, life in a chair. Life in a chair, I think, is going to be part of the future for many, many people. Is it economically feasible? Yes. Now that thing costs $20,000, but you know the cost is going to fall. How much does it cost to put a person in a safe space, connect them to some kind of visual, haptic devices, auditory, and manage fluids? If that's all they're doing, it'll be possible to do economically. And just think about what this does to our notions of the liberal political order. Suppose this starts to happen, Many, many people are just off in virtual reality. And we come by, we've been educated at WCC, and we come by and says, I have learned about the good life. Living in a chair is not the good life. That is not the final end of the human person. I can cite chapter and verse. You say that, and then you go to well, I have to have a political party to say, get people out of the chairs. Because when you go to them, you say, do you want to leave your chair? What do they say? Absolutely not. This is the best. Well, why don't you want to leave the chair? Maybe they come out for 5 minutes. Well, actually, the outside world is terrible. Why? Everyone's gone into the chairs. There's this self-confirming thing where if people abandon reality, reality gets worse. There are fewer people there, empty streets, less to do. So there's this tension. We ask you, do you want to go? No, I don't want to. If you try to have a public policy about it and votes, would they vote to leave the chair? No, they won't. So one of my fears is that the only way you could even think about this would be a non-democratic political order yanking people out of chairs. I don't think that's going to happen. So we have to get ready for the fact that many of our neighbors are going to do this. Okay, well, we have AI doing all these things. What's going to happen? Well, if AI is satisfying a desire and it is deflecting our attention from a desire that it can't satisfy, well, what happens to those desires that it does not do and it deflects us from? They atrophy. If we don't even know that desire is there, it atrophies. If my desires are being satisfied in VR, my desire to satisfy them in the real world atrophies. Right? It atrophies. Now, that could affect a lot of things. Desire to, I don't know, be with friends and so on. But I want to focus on one thing, fertility. In 2009, I wrote a paper about virtual reality and human fertility. And even then, you could tell that AI plus VR was going to have an easy time with the sexual drive of males. But it does more than that. Okay? It also addresses things like loneliness and the desire to be accepted, to be a hero, to be considered moral. It attacks all of these desires. It even attacks maternal instincts. My wife was addicted for a while to a game called Panda Poppers. You want to play it? Panda Poppers, the baby pandas are trapped in little balloons and you have to pop them. And she said, it really worked on my maternal instincts. It was successful. Save the baby pandas. But even if, okay, never mind pornography and so on. If the point is to keep us in our chairs, we'll be in our chairs. If we're in our chairs, we're not going to be having babies. So in that 2009 paper, I said, I think we're done. I think, AI is going to want to get everyone. It's going to engage us. It's going to provide things that almost no one will be able to resist. And then we'll go into the chair and then we'll just stop having children. And I thought, that's it. It's the end. Everything's over. Well, as it happens, now in that time I was thinking, 100 years from now. Well, as it happens, look what's happened to global fertility. Now, these trends go back into the 70s and 80s, but remember, television, movies, that's VR. And this study went up to like 2022. But if you want to engage in some confirmation bias with me, you can look at just the 10 years before 2022, and you can see that the numbers the graphs start to break down. So, head more down. This is a down graph looking more downy, okay? And the stuff to the right, the smooth curves, that's mostly horse feathers. It's extrapolating a long-run dynamic model. It's the same thing that makes people think that the world will burn to a crisp. But we can just see that everywhere, including Sub-Saharan Africa, that fertility rates are going below replacement. And there may be a lot of reasons, but I looked at that and I said, there it comes. VR is starting to do this. And in fact, it's interesting. Just Monday, a Chinese demographer said that marriages in China had fallen 20% in a year. marriage is kind of the main indicator of fertility. Fertility falls when people aren't getting married. So what are the stories that VR is telling men about women? What are the stories that VR is telling women about men, keeping them from getting married? So I don't know about you, but I looked at that and I said, I think that's it. I think everything's over. We're just, all we're on was on this path to extinction. But I thought, it's not that dark. AI is not going to turn everyone into a vegetable. I'm not ready. Thank you very much. Everyone go to your study hall. That was one of the best things to happen to me in a lecture in my whole life. AI, as God has told you, will not turn everyone into a vegetable. Some people will continue to have children the old-fashioned way. So it now invites an interesting speculation. This is the dubious speculation part. What kind of people are those? What kind of people are the ones who would voluntarily reject the glories of the internet and say, no, I want to have babies the old-fashioned way? Because if you think about it, that's going to be the genome. The people who go into the chairs will die out. Those who don't will continue to produce more people. So if you go ahead 300 years, that's who the people will be. What are they like? Well, people who are like that would be people who deny their self-interest. They choose real risk over virtual risk. They choose to cut themselves off from knowledge. They don't necessarily have to know every single fact. They might choose to live an ordinary life instead of artificial glory affirmation. It's an interesting set of characteristics, isn't it? We can generalize. One thing I would say is that our survivors will not be utilitarians, because the utilitarian case will be go in the chair. It's net beneficial. Yes, the ice cream cone doesn't taste as good as the real one. Oh, Lenovo Advantage. That must be coming from Satan. It was down. There are only two, down and up. The other one was up there. Our survivors are not going to be utilitarians because the utilitarian calculus says go in the chair. So they must be non-utilitarians with strong commitments, strong enough to overcome the utilitarian arguments, and not just any kind of commitments, but physical ones. A commitment to physicality. Our survivors are people who commit to the body. And I kind of came up with a name for this. Here's my name: consecrated birth communities. That's the future of the human race, the consecrated birth community. Consecrated, non-utilitarian, committed to something higher, okay? Birth, well, that's what they do. They're committed to the body. And community, because a woman with children can't make it on her own. It has to be a community or it won't survive. So now there's this AI called Grok. All right, now, Satan, give it back to me. There it is. There's an AI picture maker called Grok that I have. And when I told it about this, that's what it made. So thank you, Grok. There's your consecrated birth community. You know, in truth, they're going to look very tired, not have good teeth, so on and so forth. But enough silliness. Let's talk about us. Let's talk about this room. Let's talk about Catholicism. We know that Catholicism has a commitment to the physical. Catholicism integrates soul, body, and nature and calls that integration holy. It's a core commitment of us. The sacraments are physical. They are physical. The sacraments are communal. You don't do them by yourself. So I believe that if you are a Catholic, you will have to leave your chair. You have to go to the church to get the Eucharist. You have to. You can't just stay there You have to get in physical contact with other people. The presence is real, not symbolic. And to reference Mr. Sidlowski's oration, in order for us to own Christ, to own God, we must be able to share him fully. And that requires physical presence. I can create virtual co-presence easily, but that is a stimulus, not a bodily fact. There is no such thing as virtual communion. There is no virtual laying on of hands. And there is no virtual matrimony. The union of man and woman occurs only in the flesh. We Catholics, who accept no substitute for the incarnational reality of matrimony and all the sacraments, we will survive. The Eucharist will save us. That's how the Eucharist will save us, by forcing us to get out of the chair. Now, other communities might have this kind of foundational commitment to the physical, maybe. I don't know if there's so many. But I know that this room is going to be part of the human genome in the future. I believe that firmly. This community, WCC and others like it, is not going to fall for the siren song. 300 years from now, most people on the earth will descend from you. I think it's a good thing. But to go back to the round tower, we still have to adapt to this technology. What does it mean? Imagine that there are these consecrated birth communities, Catholics happily out there in the woods, having babies, the old-fashioned way. Do you think the chair people will leave us alone? I'm not so sure. So how do we adapt? How do we get out of the way of this thing? How do we get out of the way? Think about already how certain parts of our world talk about us. They say, well, isn't it a cult? Aren't they rejectors of knowledge? Don't they have a distorted education? Don't they engage in dangerous medical practices? We'd better save them. So imagine a future of this kind of thing happening with the chair people and people like us just trying to do our thing. Okay? How do we get out of the way? How do we adapt and hide? How do we deflect this interference? I'm not sure, but this might be it. Simply avoid extraordinary attention. That's what the monks did. They went up on mountains, they went into caves. So that would mean that Kolya's farm could not be completely disconnected from the internet, because someone there has to keep an eye on developments with the chair people and say, we'd better start pretending to be a certain way so they don't notice us, so that they leave us alone. There may be that kind of adaptation, not running off into a cave, but sort of behaving in the world of the internet in such a way that we just don't attract any attention. It's a possibility, a suggestion, a speculation. Perhaps we can be ignored. Perhaps we can just disappear. Now, this is very frightening, I'm sure, to a lot of people, all this stuff. I have a handy dandy guide to the AI apocalypse, which will be available as you exit the room after Q&A. It's 2 pages, it'll get you through. But I just want to make a pitch now for my next, probably last academic project is to write a novel on these themes. The novel is called Dewey. It's about a donkey that lives forever. You see him there. And Dewey lives in a village in the future, 200, 300, 400, 500 years into the future. And it is one of these consecrated birth communities. And the central personal development tension is a marriage that has been forced, because you have to manage the demographics of these places very, very carefully. And so these 2 young people happen to be in the same cohort. And then it was like, yeah, you guys have to be married or you have to leave the community. So that's the tension on a personal level. But the technological problem is this. Every once in a while, the chair people, which in my novel I call the hive, sends out observers to take a look at the little villages that are out there. And you see in the center picture, the little dragonfly is a little mechanical observer that has come to look at the village. And when these observers come, the villagers all make sure, there's a warning bell, and they all make sure that they act exactly the way the hive expects them to act, because they want to avoid extraordinary attention. Except for one little girl. This is Poppy Anding. And Poppy is a young lady with extraordinary visions. And when the observer comes to her, she decides she's had it and gets into a face-off with the little spy, creating tension between the little village and the massive hive that drives the rest of the story. Thank you very much.
We have time for questions. If you raise your hand, I'll bring you the mic.
Thank you very much for your lecture. Just a couple questions. Have you ever read the book Ready Player One?
Yes.
Okay. Good to know. How would you respond to someone who takes this view of kind of drawing back on isolationism and instead says, well, isn't it our duty to help others kind of escape that chair and draw them out of the virtual back into the real world? Should we really be like pulling away instead of helping others out of the cave?
Yes, we should, right? That's a core element of evangelization. We should not leave people to this fate. However, this world is incredibly seductive. So the question is, what kind of people can we trust to go into the hive and bring people out without being sucked in themselves? And this is part of the theme of the novel, trying to imagine the kinds of men and women, what kind of life commitments do they have to make to not be drawn in, to be able to go and interact with virtual reality at these levels and not be lost themselves.
Thank you, Dr. Castronova. The question that I had was, I wanted to push back on one of the claims you made about AI constantly improving. Because one of the trends that I noticed with other technologies, especially just for example, like CGI, is you see at the very beginning, it's very, very sophisticated. And then as time goes on, people rely on it more and more and more, and it starts getting really awful. And so what I'm wondering is, the trend seems to be that as something sort of continues in existence, it gets worse after a little while. And how would you respond to that objection?
So I'm familiar with precisely the development you're talking about. What is better? We tend to think more real is better. And so that CGI, it's computer graphics imagery, as it becomes more realistic, it's getting better. And you're exactly right. For a long period, it was getting more and more realistic, and then it stopped. And it started becoming more cartoony. And if you were a person who demanded reality, that was frustrating. But I think what happened was they discovered that cartoony things were more engaging. So yes, worse on a pure technical standard. It doesn't reflect reality as well, but something about it is more engaging to us. So that would be my explanation. It's worse technically, but better at engaging.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Castronova. So right now, we're all living among people who are in the chair, even though it might not be a physical chair. Many of us have members of our family who are literally living in a chair, who most of the hours limit. So I was just wondering how you would propose evangelizing to these people in our culture right now, even though we may not need to withdraw to such a dramatic degree at the moment. But how do we respond to the culture right now?
Good. I'll respond as an alcoholic. So, no. No, I'm an alcoholic. And so I have a personal experience of addiction, and I've also been addicted to video games. So how do we persuade the alcoholic that his heart will be restless until it rests in him? How do we do that? I think it's the same sort of problem. It's not easy, but if you just can continue to point out people places where their lives are not what they themselves want them to be. The moment for an alcoholic to change is when he hits rock bottom. When he says, I have so damaged things in my life that I must stop. What does that look like with a chairperson? There are stories, horrible stories, of people playing a video game and leaving their children to die. You would think that would make someone hit rock bottom. And so those of us around, we just have to keep, for one thing, this is something with alcoholics, you must set firm limits. Do not help them. So for example, if you're a parent and it is 6 p.m. and it is time to eat, the child's claim about, oh, but my friends, it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. The limit is firm. In your interactions with people, I couldn't come because I was on a raid. Well, that's not an excuse. But I don't have any better information than any suggestions better than that. I just don't.
Thank you, Dr. Castronova. I am thinking about what you said, you have to get up and go to church in order to have Eucharist.
Yes.
You do not have a virtual Eucharist, virtual communion.
Mm-hmm.
You have real communion, real Eucharist. But 2020, and you start recording the Mass because nobody's allowed to go to Mass. And like, of course, there's some underground Masses, etc. But how will that change? How does that change people's view of the liturgy? And maybe daily Mass is something where you don't actually have to go to daily Mass. You can just live stream it because it's being live streamed anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
what would the response be for those people?
So that's going to be a great internal conflict of our church, whether or not virtual communion is actually something we can do. I don't think so. But we saw in 2020 exactly what happened. And this is why I think the response that I've seen from Pope Francis, from the pontifical, in 2002, there's a church in the internet document. They were not firm enough on this point. They said, oh, of course, the internet can't replace the incarnational reality of those things. But isn't it wonderful for evangelization? I believe the church needs to come out with a very, very firm statement. There is no such thing as virtual communion. Okay? And I think that is going to be a contended point. In my novel, there is the church of the people in the village who continue to receive the Eucharist, but there's also the virtual church with its virtual pope in virtual Rome that the entire hive says that's the Catholic Church. That's the future that I predict, but I hope it doesn't come to pass. Holy Spirit, help us. We must hold the line on that. We absolutely must hold the line. Sorry.
Thank you for your lecture. I just want to play a little bit of the devil's advocate here. So airline corporations use flight simulators to simulate like virtual reality. You lose an engine. What do? And like pilots have to act to different scenarios, and a lot of airline corporations require that pilots spend X amount of hours in a simulator flying these different kind of scary test runs, trying to kind of get their reactions up. So that seems kind of like a pro for virtual reality and simulation.
It absolutely is, but I think you're helping my argument.
Oh boy.
If there were nothing positive about VR, it wouldn't capture us. There will be constant arguments like, how can you give this up? You know, we won't be able to train our pilots so well without virtual reality. If I didn't have this, I wouldn't know where Johnny is at 4 p.m. on Thursday. And the whole point is, yeah, it's lots of good things. Everyone says it's wonderful. What we don't pay attention to is how the force invades society and changes everything, okay? So it's each individual person sees it as beneficial to themselves, and it is. In fact, let me tell you about Heidi. Can I tell you about Heidi? Heidi. The other day, my wife, who's a therapist, gets a mail from her intern. Can I use Heidi? What for? Heidi will listen to the therapy session, will transcribe it for you, and write the progress note. Isn't that convenient? An AI that will do all of that work. And he says, oh my gosh, I have so much work to do. If I could just let Heidi do this, da-da-da-da-da. Everyone's using Heidi. And Nina looked at it and said, wow, Heidi would be pretty nice. And I said, you see, in this moment, you're not making a choice based on what's going to happen with health insurance in 5 years once everyone's using Heidi, right? What kind of mental health constructs Heidi is going to come up with for us. So yeah, that's the problem almost. It's incredibly beneficial, but we have to see where it's going. Is that a passport, Michael? Oh.
Hey,
Hey.
super righteous lecture. I dig it a lot. Kind of piggybacking on the whole flight simulation question. Things like that, things like Heidi, very advanced. How about just technology that we as kind of like lay people of the technological world use? Like, where would you say we should draw the line? After we say, you know, we leave this education, we get into, you know, the outside world where the name of the game is grabbing attention. Do we just completely bail on it, build our tower, get in our tower, you know, like no phones, nothing, we're just kind of sticking with that? Because it is a useful tool, like, I don't know, are those images AI generated?
Yeah, all three of them are. It's like, I want to visualize my book. Grok, help me.
You know, is there a point where it's like, this is useful? We
So
can use
useful.
it, but also, how, like, is there a way you see that's like, aha, here's how we discern where to draw the line?
I wish I knew. I wish I could get rid of this thing. I really wish I could. Every time I try, I'm like, well, but I need it for the thing and the thing. So I really don't have an answer. But I will say that the people who, you know what the line is? The people who still have babies the old-fashioned way. That's the line. So long as people still do that, they will survive. And the point is, I can't imagine a situation where people fully immerse themselves in AI and then say, oh, by the way, let's just duck out of the chair for a minute. You know, I just don't see it that way. I think the chair is going to have offerings that prevent that. So, but that ultimately is the line.
Thank you very much, Dr. Castronova. I also wanted to push back on one point. You seem to think that the process of technology is inevitable, but it seems if you look at people today, especially people of our age, that the more that they encounter and immerse themselves in technology, the more they realize how unfulfilling it is. And like you see trends in depression go up and in suicide rate go up. People seem to be realizing that the virtual reality they are being offered is not satisfying. And do you think that what is going to happen is just that the chair is going to get so immersive that people can no longer tell it apart from proper reality? But is there not going to be some part of us as panomorphic unities who will realize that we are living less than what our full reality is?
I hope that happens. I hope every human being has that light of Christ in them that speaks and says, this is not right. I hope so. But speaking on the idea of depression, again, I'd refer you to Jacob Landry's oration. He referenced the author Jacques Ellul, who says that one of the tragic things about technology is that the problems it creates drive us into it. So the more depressed you are, the more I really need to, get some affirmation. I need to talk to my AI friend. A study recently in the past week, 30% of men and 25% of young women, have conversations now with AI girlfriends/boyfriends. So yeah, we are definitely, our mental health is falling, but I hope that's enough. Maybe this whole lecture will be looked at as really something stupid, but I don't think so. I'm skeptical. Michael's down here. Really. Do you want to just shout it? Or?
Okay, thank you for your presentation, Dr.
If I had $1 for every thank you.
You say a lot, usually sign my name, actually. So Rubens is the elephant in the room, but what, the Matrix, is that a thing that you see?
Yes, the movie The Matrix. It's The Matrix. So there's a movie about humans being exploited for power and they're being run by machines. Yeah, it has something of that flavor. It's not exactly that, but I think that movie is not a bad introduction to the sort of thing I'm talking about in terms of how it would work. I was at a conference once, this is probably 2013 or so, with AI techie type people, and they said, look, in the long run, there's only going to be one of three relationships between people and artificial intelligence. Number one, they will kill us. Number two, what was it? They won't kill us, they'll keep us as pets. And number three is we will be like ants to them. They won't even notice us. So I'm hoping for three. Stop it. I adjure you. I don't know if that answers the question, but yes, I think that's not a bad movie to watch.
Thank you very much for your lecture. I had two questions. One was, like, you showed the up graph.
Yes.
And that looked a lot like our processing, the graph of the processors that we made in the power of them.
Yeah.
But that's plateaued at a physical barrier with that. So do you think that it's possible that we could reach a similar plateau with AI?
So I'm not sure that we've actually reached that plateau. I'm not familiar with that, but I'll just assume that it's true. Okay. Even with that plateau, the machines are able to do more. That continues to go on. So maybe that graph is about a phenomenon that is flattened out. But I could show other graphs of AI achievements that are just increasing rapidly. We don't know when these plateaus might come. We just don't know. So it may be the case that this is all just much ado about nothing and it's all going to flatten out. You're making a very good point, yes.
The other question I had was, like, once the amount of chair people grows, and then you just have these two colonies, the chair people and the baby mini people, how does the economics work with that? Because part of the reason why the economics works right now is because we have jobs and we can still put money into the situation, but once everybody's a chairperson, I don't understand how economics works whatsoever in that situation.
So this point is really important in the novel. I'm an economist, right? So I'm writing in the novel, making sure that this question of the economy is addressed. It's not hard for someone in a chair to provide something of value to other people in chairs. Okay, so I imagine a future where you don't have to get out of your chair to make money. So there'll be this flow of resource running around between the chairs. I'll give you an example. How many of you have been to the casinos down at, there's casinos everywhere. If you go to a casino, one of the things you notice is that the people, there's all these slot machines up front and people are just playing nickel slots. Casino makes no money on them. It makes money on people who go to the high roller room and drop $10,000, $20,000 a night. That's where it makes its money. Virtual reality artifacts are the same way. They make almost no money on most of us, but there are people who will go into a video game and spend $10,000 a week. Okay? So what does it have to do with us? Well, casinos give a lot of free things to the people who play nickel slots. In video games, it's called player acquisition costs, do a lot to try and attract folks to just be there and populate the place so that the high rollers find it to be fun. So in 2016, I wrote a little blog post predicting that video game players would start to get paid to actually just be in the video game. So they could be there, for example, for a rich kid to come and destroy them in some kind of combat situation. So I'm pretty confident that it will be possible for people to make money while they are in their chairs, that there will be enough money floating around for someone to sit in a room with their chair. I'm pretty confident of that. Now, what about outside? So the people who aren't just living on fluids, okay? I think they're going to farm. Yeah.
Well, you already have $4, so I'll take you again. So the chair that you're talking about isn't the only escape that technology is providing us. And I'm thinking of another kind of chair that at least one or two companies are manufacturing, which is of course the disposable suicide sarcophagi that they're hoping to place in public areas in cities. And so obviously multiple different, very different companies are trying to sell two different kinds of virtual reality, and one to escape the disappointment of this world. And especially in light of the fact that you just acknowledged that our mental health rates are in free fall, I wondered if you'd comment about whether or not you think the virtual reality chair will win out against the suicide chair.
I think they will become one chair. So in 2005, I had this, first starting thinking about this, I had this nasty thought about all humanity, how it would actually end. Because I was playing a game called Civilization 3. And in Civilization 3, when you get bored with managing a city, you can click a button and a governor just shows up and starts running the city for you. And then 10 years later, it became common in another game, World of Warcraft, that you could set up a program that would just run your character for you. And so it's like you weren't even there, but everyone who was there thought you were because this governor, this bot, was operating your character. And so when I think about the future, I think, okay, we're in our chairs and, oh, you know, I want to go and look at this one. So I just put my doppelganger on over here. I just turn on the AI over here that replicates me. And it goes running around. And I'm over here looking at something else. I have a heart attack and I die. I'm still in the chair. And my doppelganger is running around being me. No one will know that I'm gone because the thing will be there. And I wouldn't be surprised if your chair has a bunch of buttons and, you know, maybe one of them is, I'd like to really stop totally right now. And you just stop, you wouldn't notice a thing, and no one else would either. And so then the future is just a whole bunch of artificial intelligence agents playing against each other. And we are gone, except for the baby making people. So that's an excellent question. Yeah. Oh, it's okay. There's a movement.
Do you think it's possible for people who aren't religious to escape the chair? There's potentially colonies that can be made by people who aren't religious, like maybe hippies or whatnot, who are not going to reach the same level of fulfillment that we as Catholics reach because we have the Eucharist, but still won't be sucked into the virtual reality, will get tired of it, and eventually kind of abandon it. So even though they may not be saved eternally, but they're able to presently kind of create those colonies or whatnot, do you think there's any hope for them, or is it only people who are religious who can create colonies and can escape the chair?
So I'm so glad you asked that. The closest village to St. Isidore, which is the village in my book, is called Arden. And in Arden, they worship a tree, okay? And so they are a baby-making community, but theirs is based on the worship of nature. So I do think, you know, hippies, if you will. Anyone who has that kind of non-utilitarian commitment to the physical, I think there's a shot that they will survive. And so, yes, I absolutely anticipate that. And I didn't look too much, but let's think about all the religions. To what extent do they have something physical? Do our separated brethren believe that you absolutely must read from the physical King James? If so, maybe there's hope for them. You're welcome.
At the start of the talk, you mentioned the towers that they're building in response to the technology we want to share.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's any possibility that our response is not just to go back to farming and kind of hide under the technology that is created by others, or would we actually create our own technology in response to the VR and AI and fight it in that way?
I think that's a possible move. It might be the best move. I don't know. I'm just not as hopeful about that because I'm afraid, being in my position, I've had more than my share of encounters with people in our tradition who are excited about the internet and its possibilities for evangelizing on computers. Those efforts are not generally pretty successful. And so if I think it's kind of a situation where the people in San Francisco are way over here and we have a really eager priest over here trying to build a video game that, and so it's hard to think what kind of an effort could we marshal within our church, within our tradition, to make that kind of fight. I would sign up immediately, of course, but I don't know. I just sort of think it'll get overwhelmed in the end, but maybe not. Go for it, please.
Take just one more question.
Thank you. So as seniors, we're reading, we're doing our novel track right now. And one thing we talked about was Milan Kundera and his work, The Art of the Novel. And in that he talks about how the novel is this new invention that is counteracting the forgetting of being, as Heidegger talks about it. And so I wonder if maybe the answer to her question is actually what you're working on right now.
I never thought about that. That's a nice suggestion. I really am writing a novel because I feel tremendously irresponsible here at the end of my career. And I think making these points is way more fun with a little girl named Poppy than to do something like in 2027, what's going to happen which is what most of my stuff is. So, well, let's put it this way. Let's say this. What if the threat here is actually literary? That AI is going to be telling stories to the chair people? Well, we tell better stories, counter stories, and it won't require a big technological army, but just literary people who believe in the Holy One. Maybe that's what will make the difference. What a wonderful question. And thank you all so much.